Hey everyone, ever feel like you're just drowning in to-dos,
Yeah.
but you're not actually getting any real work done?
Yeah.
Like you're just constantly busy, but not productive.
Right. Yeah.
Well, today we are diving into this awesome article called How to Meta Work and Get More Life.
I love this article. It's so good.
It's not about cramming more into your day,
Yeah.
but it's about making the work you do actually work for you.
Yeah. And what I think is so fascinating about this article is it really dives into the psychology of productivity, not just the, typical time management hacks.
Right.
It's really about understanding how our brains work best.
So, okay, let's unpack this whole idea of meta work because it sounds very like meta,
Yeah.
very like 2023. The author compares it to sharpening a tool before you use it. So instead of just like jumping right into the task, you're taking the time to prepare.
I love that analogy.
Does that resonate with you at all?
Absolutely. I think we've all been there where we feel like we're just so busy doing
Yeah.
that we never actually stop and think strategically
Yeah.
about what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Yes. Have you ever felt like you were so busy doing that you never had time to think about your work?
All the time. And that's where this idea of preparing comes in. The article talks about decluttering your mind, just like you would declutter your physical workspace.
Right.
It's about freeing up your mental RAM so that you can actually focus on the work that matters.
It's so true.
Yeah.
Because if you've got a million tabs open in your brain, who can think clearly? It's like trying to write a novel on a computer that's about to crash from all the applications you have open.
The article even quotes Richard Feynman, the famous physicist.
Okay, yeah.
He used to say, "My thinking is in my writing."
Mm.
And I think that's so powerful because it emphasizes the importance of getting your thoughts out of your head
Yeah.
and onto paper.
So instead of like mentally juggling a million things, you write them down, you clear that mental clutter, and then you can actually tackle them one by one. I can already feel my anxiety levels dropping just thinking about that.
Exactly. And the author even takes it a step further by suggesting activities like reviewing your notes,
Yeah.
organizing your bookmarks, even doodling as a way to kind of warm up your brain.
Doodling
Yeah.
for that main event, for that work that you need to do.
So it's like stretching before a workout, but for your brain,
That.
you're priming it for peak performance. I love that.
That's so good. And it reminds me of that classic advice, sharpen the saw before you cut down the tree.
Yes.
Sometimes you need slow down to actually go faster.
Absolutely. And that's a recurring theme in this article, actually, the power of being intentional and working with your own cognitive rhythms instead of against them.
I like that. Working with your rhythms. Okay, so we've prepped our mental workspace. We're feeling focused and ready to go. What's the next step on this little meta work journey of ours?
Right.
Well, the article talks about planning, but it emphasizes that this isn't about like creating these rigid schedules.
Yeah.
You have to stick to no matter what.
Exactly. And in fact, the article actually distinguishes between two types of work styles. And this is something that they actually borrow from Cal Newport's book, Deep Work. Have you ever heard of the manager's schedule versus the maker's schedule?
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I feel like we've all experienced that manager schedule
Yeah.
where you're just jumping between meetings, answering emails, putting out fires left and right. It's just like constant context switching
Yeah.
and just staying on top of things.
Precisely. And while that's necessary, for some aspects of work, it can be a real productivity killer for tasks that require deep focus, which is where that maker's schedule comes in.
Right. Because if you're a maker, you need those longer, uninterrupted blocks of time to get into the flow state, to really dive deep into a project. And the author of this article seems to really advocate
Yeah.
for a more flexible approach to planning overall.
Yes. He really stresses the importance of having clear priorities, but then being willing to adapt to the ever-changing nature of the workday.
Because no day is ever what you expect it to be,
Right, exactly.
no matter how much you plan for it.
And he even admits to keeping his calendar relatively open and using his to-do list more like a restaurant menu
Interesting.
where he kind of chooses what to focus on based on his energy levels and the urgency of the tasks at hand.
I love that analogy, the to-do list as a menu. But that almost feels counterintuitive to being productive, though, right? Because shouldn't we have a strict schedule and stick to it religiously?
Right. That's a common misconception.
Yeah.
But this article actually delves into a bunch of different scheduling approaches. He even references a bunch of different algorithms from this book, Algorithms to Live By.
Interesting.
But one that stood out to me was this idea of the shortest processing time method.
The shortest processing time. Tell me more about this.
It's pretty simple, actually. You basically prioritize the quickest tasks first
Okay.
to kind of build momentum and clear your plate.
Okay.
So by tackling those smaller items first, you reduce the cognitive load of having a million unfinished things swirling around in your head.
So it's like you're getting those quick wins.
Yeah.
And it gives you that motivation to keep going.
Exactly.
Like checking things off the list, giving yourself that little dopamine boost.
Exactly. It's about working smarter, not harder.
I like that.
And that actually ties into another key point that the article makes, which is knowing when to delegate and when to say no to commitments that don't align with your priorities.
Because sometimes the most productive thing you can do is say no
Yes.
to something that's not a good use of your time
Exactly.
or energy.
It's about setting boundaries, both for yourself and for others.
Yes. Managing those expectations.
And speaking of managing expectations, I have to tell you about this anecdote that the author shares about his colleague who has this 3-drawer system.
A 3-drawer system.
Okay. Have you ever heard of anything like this?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
But I love where this is going already.
So imagine this. 3 drawers, right.
Okay.
Any new request goes in the bottom drawer.
Okay.
They only move up to the middle drawer if they're followed up on it.
Right.
And get this, only the items that make it to the top drawer after multiple follow-ups are actually considered important enough to prioritize.
I need a second to process this. It's like survival of the fittest.
Right.
But for your to-do list,
Right.
that is brilliant
It's so good.
and kind of hilarious.
I know.
It really highlights how we get caught up in things that seem urgent just because they're loud, not necessarily because they're important.
It's a perfect illustration of Parkinson's law in action. Work expands to fill the time allotted,
Yeah.
and also the Pareto principle, that 80% of our results come from 20% of our efforts.
Right.
This 3-drawer system is like a filter that helps you identify and focus on that crucial 20%.
I love that. That's a mind-blowing connection. So we've prepped our minds, we've got our flexible plan. That filters for what's truly important. Now, how do we actually get down to business? What's next?
Yeah.
Well, the article talks about performing next. And it seems like it's not just about working hard, it's about focusing the right way.
That's right. The article goes deep into the nuances of focus, specifically the difference between deep focus and shallow focus. Think of it like photography. Deep focus is like a narrow aperture. You're zeroing in on one thing.
Okay.
Whereas shallow focus is a wider aperture. You're taking in a broader perspective.
So deep focus would be for tasks like writing code or analyzing data, where you need that laser-like concentration.
Exactly.
And shallow focus would be more for things like brainstorming or editing, where a broader perspective is actually helpful.
You got it.
Okay.
And then within performing, there's also this big emphasis on understanding your own energy levels and how they relate to focus.
Right.
Because we all have those peak performance times, those moments when we're just naturally in the zone.
Oh, totally.
Do you find that's true for you?
Absolutely. For me, it's definitely mornings.
Okay.
That's when I'm most alert, most focused, ready to tackle those really mental demanding tasks. Yeah. And then later in the day, my energy definitely dips. And I'm much better suited for those. Less demanding tasks, like answering emails or something.
Right. And the article then makes this a really interesting connection between energy levels and what it calls strategic automaticity.
Strategic automaticity. That sounds a little intimidating. Like I'm some kind of like productivity robot or something.
Yeah.
Can you break that down for me?
Of course. And I assure you, no robots are required. It's really about bringing mindfulness to even your most routine tasks.
Okay.
So imagine having systems in place that are so ingrained that they almost run on autopilot, freeing up your mental energy for more important work.
So that would be things like responding to emails or filling out forms.
Exactly.
Right.
All those little things that can really derail your day if you let them.
Instead of them derailing my day, I can streamline them and get them done efficiently.
Exactly.
Okay. And I remember the article mentioned batching similar tasks together
Yes.
as a strategy for this.
Batching is a fantastic way to leverage strategic automaticity.
Yep.
The author talks about how back when he worked in recruitment, he used to batch all of his candidate calls back to back so that he could stay in that interview mindset and just power through them efficiently.
It's like you're building momentum.
Yeah.
And it probably feels a lot less draining than constantly switching gears.
Exactly. It also reduces the likelihood of those tasks spilling over and eating into your time for deep work.
Right.
The article also talks about the power of templates, checklists, even automation for those kinds of repetitive tasks.
Makes sense.
And the author actually shares an anecdote about how he used to use templates for candidate communication when he was working in recruitment, which freed up his time to focus on the more strategic parts of his job.
I like it.
Speaking of which, have you ever used templates or checklists to streamline your work?
Oh my gosh. Templates are a lifesaver,
Mm-hmm.
especially when it comes to emails.
Right.
Anything that saves me from staring at a blank screen, trying to conjure up the words, is a win in my book.
I feel that. It's all about working smarter, not harder. And this ties into another key point that the article makes about recharging, which we often think of rest as being unproductive, but the article actually challenges that notion.
Yeah, we definitely fall into that whole I'll sleep when I'm dead mentality.
Right.
But we've talked about like preparing our mental workspace.
Right.
And part of that is recognizing that our brains, like our bodies, need downtime to actually function at their best.
Absolutely.
And so the article talks about diffused mode thinking. What exactly is happening in our brains when we're in that diffused mode?
So think of it as the opposite of that laser-focused analytical state.
Okay.
It's when we let our minds wander a little bit, whether that's taking a walk, daydreaming, even showering.
Right.
And here's the fascinating thing. That's often when our brains make connections and come up with creative solutions.
That's that aha moment you have in the shower.
Yeah.
After you've been wrestling with a problem all day.
Exactly.
And suddenly the solution just seems obvious.
Exactly.
Right.
The article even mentions Thomas Edison, who was famous for taking naps while holding a ball in his hand. So if he dozed off, the ball would fall and wake him up.
Edison was taking power naps with a ball in his hand.
Yeah.
That's wild.
He believed that brief period between sleep and wakefulness was when his subconscious was most active.
Wow.
Which is kind of amazing.
That's genius.
Of
I know.
course.
I have to try that. So we're talking about being intentional even with our downtime, not just passively scrolling through social media, but engaging in activities that actually give our brains a break from that constant stimulation.
Exactly. The author calls it structured relaxation.
Structured relaxation.
Yes.
Okay.
So things like spending time in nature, reading, listening to music, activities that allow for what he calls default mode thinking. And this default mode, much like diffused mode, is crucial for creativity and problem solving.
So we're giving our subconscious minds the space to work their magic.
Exactly.
I like it. Okay, so we've covered preparing, planning, performing, recharging, and relaxing. That's a pretty comprehensive approach to productivity.
It is.
But then the article throws in this final, almost paradoxical concept, the art of not doing.
Yes.
Tell me more.
It's about recognizing that true productivity isn't just about doing more, but about being selective about what we choose to do and what we don't do.
Right.
And there's this Zen of Python proverb that I absolutely love that I think perfectly illustrates this. It says, now is better than never, although never is often better than right now.
Oh, I love that.
Right.
So it's about being mindful of those tasks that seem urgent, but are really just distractions
Yeah.
from what's truly important.
Exactly.
Learning to say no is a superpower.
It really is.
It really is.
Sometimes the most productive thing we can do is nothing at all.
Yes. Giving ourselves permission to step away,
Yeah.
recharge, and then come back with a fresh perspective.
Exactly.
Like hitting the reset button on our brains.
I love that.
Okay, so we've unpacked a ton of great stuff today. From meta work to strategic automaticity to Edison's power naps.
Right.
What's the key takeaway for our listeners? How can they apply all of this to their own lives?
Well, I think the important thing to remember is that this article is a toolbox. It's not a rigid prescription.
Right.
It's about experimenting, finding what resonates with your work style and your individual needs.
So be mindful.
Yes.
Be intentional about your work. Understand your own rhythms.
Yeah. Good.
And don't be afraid to say no. To make space for what truly matters.
Yes.
I love it.
It's about taking that step back and thinking about the why behind our productivity, not just the how.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
This has been an incredibly enlightening conversation.
It has.
Thank you so much for diving in with me.
Of course.
Until next time, everyone, happy metaworking.